It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, dig into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Peter Williams, and we're going to be discussing his brand new book, The Surprising Genius of Jesus, What the Gospels Reveal About the Greatest Teacher. Peter, it is always a joy to speak with you, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you.
Well, I was looking at my old notes from previous interviews this morning, and it's been about 3 years, December of 2020. We got geeky and talked about Greek New Testament sort of stuff, but the show is ever growing, so we're going to go someplace we probably did last time, and that's just asking you to share kind of the elevator pitch version of your origin story for somebody meeting you for the first time. Tell us a little bit about background, education, all the things. What are some of the things that make you uniquely suited to write a book like this?
Well, I'm 53, married, and got two adult kids, and had the privilege of growing up in a Christian family, and then going to a high school where I could learn Greek and Latin and having great teachers there, and realizing there was a need for Bible translators, going to university to do all the languages that would help me prepare for that, Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, those sorts of things. And while I was at university, feeling a change of call for realizing there's lots of good work in Bible translation, but there's also a need for Bible scholars who believe the Bible and want to write and speak to serve the church. And so that's what I've been seeking to do since then. But very blessed with 8 years of free education at the University of Cambridge, getting various degrees, and then had some time on faculty in Aberdeen University. And then I've been leading the world's, I'd say, largest collection of Bible geeks that we have in a community, which is at Tyndale House in Cambridge, England.
Yes, Cambridge, England.
I hear there are other Cambridges, but only one real one.
Right. And not to be confused with the Tyndale House publishers in Illinois. You guys are pursuing Jesus, but pursuing a whole different kind of publishing.
Yeah, we like those guys, but they came up with the name 18 years after we did.
You were first. That's fair. That's more than fair. Next, let's get into the story behind the book. You know, as a publishing guy, I'm always kind of curious. What was the spark, the genesis? Did you see a problem? Did you see a need for a book like this? How did this idea get started in your mind?
Well, I'd spent a lot of time teaching Luke chapter 15 as an interactive Bible study. It was, in a sense, as a traveling speaker. It was one of my go-to things with a group basically under 30. If there's less than 30 in a group, I want an interactive Bible study. I absolutely loved doing this story of the two sons. And I was just learning so much from interacting with the people. And after doing that for enough time, I thought, actually, there really is something to get out here, which is just about how clever Jesus is in his storytelling. It's a 3-minute story that I particularly focus on, which is Jesus' longest story in the Gospels, but they're all clever. And I don't think people have really appreciated that. That is, yeah, people think, Jesus is God, therefore he's clever. Correct. But what they don't see is just how much evidence of the cleverness there is there, and how we can take the stories that he told and put them alongside other things that humans have created, and you see that there is a greater cleverness in what Jesus is doing.
And just in terms of that struggle to see Jesus, his brilliance, his cleverness, whatever we want to say, I wonder if to some degree, do we attribute too much to his divinity and not give his humanity, his mind, enough credit? I feel like that might be an interesting balance to try to strike.
Yeah, so I don't particularly go into the question of how it works out, because the Bible doesn't tell us a lot. So we're given two texts in the book of Luke where, as a child, Jesus is said to grow in wisdom, and that's all, very perplexing because of his full divinity. And you think, how's that work? And then you've got this text over in Matthew where it says the son doesn't know the time of his return, but the father does. And you think, okay, so there has to be some space between Jesus as God knowing everything and somehow shutting off departments of knowledge for practical purposes during the incarnation. And yet you also see Jesus reading people's thoughts or knowing that in the distance beyond the sight of the eye, there's going to be a man carrying a water jar and, what people will say in particular circumstances, which is all rather interesting. And so the question of how it works, I think the Bible gives us quite a lot of range in terms of what are the psychological possibilities, and it doesn't try and narrow that down. But what we can say is, if we just focus on the result in terms of what he says, there is brilliance there. How we get there, I think there is a range of orthodox positions that you could take in terms of the incarnate Son of God's psychology. There are some things obviously wrong, but there is a range of positions that don't have any textual evidence against them.
And we'll get into some of the kind of the nuances of the connections you're making here in a bit, but does it really take a Bible scholar, somebody with special training and knowledge, to be able to see some of those hidden things? Because going through what you share about the story of the prodigal son, I assumed I knew this story well. We've heard a million sermons on it. We've read it a bunch of times. We had it in Sunday school so many times. And I felt like I was seeing the story for the first time reading them, because I missed all of this stuff. But those unique connections, is some of that based on original languages? Like, what does it take to see some of these parallels?
Well, so what I'm arguing in the book is that it's a story that works if you don't know any of the Bible at all. And it will just work across cultures, and it's a very simple story. But also, it's in some sense like a Pixar movie where there are things like that are there for the adults that the kids don't get. And that if you are a Bible scholar of Jesus's day, there are particular points that are made for you. And most of those that I point to are from the book of Genesis. So I think that actually all of Genesis's big story hits are in this 1 3-minute story, and that's something rather brilliant. We could look at any particular one of them, like take a figure like Abraham. He's the first guy in the Bible who runs. He's a father figure, like this father. The first time he runs, it's in Genesis 18 verse 6. The very first word from his mouth is quick to Sarah. That's the very first word from this father's mouth in the story. And he goes off and is getting the fatted calf, just as you get in this story. He's also the only father who gives away his inheritance while he's still alive. He has 2 sons at first, as this father does, and so on. So there are all these sort of connections you have there. And you could do that with all of the stories of Genesis. So who did it take to see it? Well, I would say that I genuinely think this tiny book, which I've written, is saying things that haven't been put together by anyone in 2,000 years. And so that there's a risk with that, which is you think, well, if it's been there all the time, why hasn't it been spotted? Well, the truth is, lots of bits of it have been spotted. So Tim Keller would say it's like the story of Cain and Abel, where the older son envious of the younger son to the point of hatred and murder. And he would draw parallels, or Kenneth Bailey would draw out the parallels there are with Esau and Jacob. So a man has 2 sons. The most famous person to have 2 and only 2 sons in the Old Testament is Isaac. And Jacob goes off into a far country after really annoying big brother by cheating him out of inheritance. He looks after animals. He comes back. And then you've got this stunning time when he returns that Esau, of all people, runs, embraces, kisses him, just like the father does in this story. So other people have pointed those things out. And I think it's really just bringing strands together. So maybe it's a bit like creating a new blend of curried pizza, where you just bring together an ingredient of curry and an ingredient of pizza from 2 different countries, and you make something new. And so that's what I think I've done. But what that does is highlight what I think Jesus was originally intending. How much does it require the Bible training that I've had? Well, I think that because I do tend to read the Bible in various different languages, it gives me a discipline to slow down, because if you're reading it in a language you don't know that well, you have to slow right down and think, what's that word mean? And it just makes you notice things. And then interactive Bible study is very helpful, because then you get feedback from audience. That plus reading other things. So I have a shelf load of books on the prodigal son. So you go through what other people have said, you interact with lots of people, you read the text slowly. Of course, you look to God for insight. So I think those are some of the things that come into my journey in seeing things.
Well, let's just jump into a couple of the particular nuances in the story of the prodigal son. I really, I guess I'd chalk it up to wordplay. You're zeroing into some of the things we see in the text. Talk to us a little bit about the splitting of the inheritance, like what was really going on with that. You share some unique things about how the sons are specifically addressing the father with the terms that they're using. When we read it in English, we kind of miss the forest for the trees on so many of these things, but when you drill down a little deeper to some of those specific meanings or what's happening, all of a sudden the story comes alive in a whole new way.
Yeah, so I think all of those things are actually in the English. So one of the problems we have is actually our bad habits when we read the Bible. So we know that Titanic sunk, so there's no suspense at all in the story of Titanic sinks. We know that the father runs the embrace and kisses him. We know that David kills Goliath, and so we just switch off. But the story of David and Goliath is 58 verses long. There's only one verse in which David kills Goliath, so there must be a whole load more in the story. And so what you've got to do is you've got to slow down with this story and look at every single thing. So it says, man had two sons. Younger one goes to his father and says, Father, that's his first word. So you notice that he calls him father. All three times he talks to his father, once in his mind and twice actually out loud. First word is father. That word is missing from the older brother's mouth when he says, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. So that's just a brilliant little detail that anyone with English reading slowly can see, that the younger brother seems to be emotionally closer to his father, even though he physically gets further away, than this older son who doesn't dress him right. And then it says give me the share of the inheritance that's coming to me. And it says he divided his property between them. And again, that's absolutely in the English, but the number of people who tell me, oh, I didn't spot that, I thought he just gave it to him. No, he gives it to the two sons. That's absolutely crucial to the story, because that means that when later in the story, older brother says, you never gave me a young goat. The problem is he gave him an entire farm with all the goats on it. That you see there's a huge dynamic there where this older brother has done incredibly well. He should be saying, hey, little brother, I am so glad you did the dirty work of asking dad the tough question. I've landed the jackpot. I've just had my inheritance up front. And of course, older brothers generally do better in inheritance than the younger brothers. And we can go into that. So it's reading that sort of stuff slowly. It's all genuinely there. But you do have to think of it fresh. So I'm still seeing new things in the story, because each time I read it slowly, expecting and looking for new things. And I think in churches, we can get into the habit of saying, well, I know the basic story. I know enough Bible. I've got enough Bible knowledge not to be embarrassed in church. So I know Obadiah's a minor prophet, may not be able to tell you much of it, but I know enough. Okay. And then you just switch off and you plateau. And really there's greater depth, and we're missing such a lot of the depth that Jesus has to teach us.
And in terms of that impact on the original audience that Jesus is speaking to, scribes, people who are going to be very familiar with some of these parallels and connections back to Genesis, what do you think that would have sparked in their minds as they're hearing Jesus share, say, this parable in particular? Because obviously Jesus has a lot of intent with making these connections.
Yeah, so we've got four different groups that are named at the beginning of Luke 15. So you've got tax collectors, who could be Jews working with the Romans, taking money that you wanted to donate to the temple, which is pretty nice of you. And they're going to take that and they're going to make sure that the Roman soldiers are getting paid indirectly, which you're pretty annoyed about, because that stops you getting liberation from Rome. So you don't really like them, and they don't take much interest in the Bible. And then there are sinners, well, people who get called sinners, presumably because they're in flagrant sin. Pharisees who are spending their time separating from sin, or trying to, because it follows them around because it's inside them. And scribes who actually copy out the Bible. And if you copy stuff out by hand, you know it really well. So you've got this absolute mixed ability audience as far as Bible knowledge is concerned. And Jesus is able to bring in these stories of Genesis where they each are making points. So Cain is envious of the acceptance of his younger brother. Abraham is incredibly generous and gives away his inheritance while he's still alive. He also is generous, welcoming complete strangers. And even bad Esau, who lost his entire inheritance because of Jacob's negotiating skills, when he came in saying, "Here I am dying of hunger," like the younger son does in the story, he's prepared to run, embrace, and kiss his younger brother. And another story, of course, is the story of Joseph, where you remember in this story, Jesus tells that he says, the father says, "Bring out the robe and the ring." Well, the time you get robe and ring suddenly brought out is Joseph coming out of prison and before Pharaoh, and that is at a time of great famine, as you have in this story. And of course, he's the only other son who's dead and alive again, as far as the father's concerned, in the Old Testament. So you get all those echoes. What does that mean? Well, think about the Joseph story. Joseph forgave his brothers who are absolutely awful. Now, if you're a Pharisee and you're wanting to donate to the temple, but that tax collector over there has just taken your money to give it to the Romans, you're pretty annoyed. And then the thought that that tax collector can somehow have a shortcut access to God through Jesus, despite having ripped you off, when you have been keeping the laws all the time, doing your bit for the team, against the Romans, well, that's really annoying. So I think that's where it really does speak to them. And of course, it speaks to us nowadays when we can not like people getting fast track access to God when we've been working so hard in our Christian life for a long time. And so we really don't want those new converts or people who don't have our ways of doing things getting too high up too soon.
In terms of additional stories, obviously, I wanted to focus on the story of the prodigal son because it's prominent in the book.
Yeah.
It's something that everybody is often quite familiar with. Share one or two other kind of shorter examples where we see these kind of connections being made back to the Old Testament and Jesus' teaching.
Yeah. So, I mean, the story in the next chapter about what I'll call the temporarily rich man and Lazarus, because of course it's not really the story of the rich man and Lazarus, because he's not rich once he gets to Hades, even if he still sort of likes to treat himself as upper class there and talk to Abraham he's never met before, rather than to Lazarus that he's had to walk past every day every time he went outside the gate. But that's an interesting case, because there's the rich man who is not named, Lazarus who is named. So you're given that same pattern that the person who's important to God is given the name, the person who's important to society is not given the name, just as you get in Exodus, where the Pharaoh of the Exodus is unnamed, but the midwives are named because they're the important ones. And no doubt the Pharaoh had his name written over many temples, but that's not important enough to get him into the Bible. But what you find is that Lazarus is covered with sores. Well, there's only one person in the Bible who's covered with sores. That's Job. But what's interesting is that Job is that the rich man is feasting every day. Well, who feasts every day in the Bible? That's Job's sons. They actually have a sibling-only feast. So it's them and their sisters that they keep on inviting. There's 7 of them, and they sort of seem to do a week-long rota and have a feast. And what we find out is that this rich man is like that. But there's another person who has a really long feast, and that's Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, from the book of Esther. And he feasts, but he invites all the men in the citadel, the common as well as the wealthy. And so where we got this rich man who won't invite even the person who's at his very gate in, and that's striking. And he's clothed with linen and purple. Well, linen and purple come up again precisely in connection with Ahasuerus, Xerxes' feast in the book of Esther. So Esther chapter 1. So again, if you're a Bible expert, this should be making connections for you. And then you've got the rich man goes to Hades, and it says he lifted up his eyes and he saw Abraham afar off. Well, where in the Bible do we get someone lifts up their eyes and sees afar off? That is Abraham who does that. That's Genesis chapter 22. He sees the mountain. So it's echoing this Bible language. And then he calls out, Father Abraham, and actually 3 times he calls him father, just like in Luke 15, 3 times the younger son calls his father. He thinks Abraham can be his father. Well, think in the Old Testament, how about Abraham? Abraham is father not just of Isaac and Ishmael, but he's father of more people than you can count, physically and then spiritually. Whereas this formerly rich man says to Abraham, make Lazarus go and talk to my 5 brothers. I've got 5 brothers so that they don't have to come here. Well, hang on. If you want to call Abraham your father, you have more than 5 brothers because Abraham's got loads and loads of kids. So you can't say, I've only got 5 brothers. If you want to call Abraham your father, then Lazarus has to be your brother, and therefore he shouldn't be outside. So all of these things are going on in that. And, this formerly rich man who was, supposedly good at counting money at one stage makes a really big mathematical mistake about how many siblings he's got.
And, whether we want to say reader takeaway, you read through this material and it makes some kind of a difference in your Christian walk. Like for the average reader, how do you hope they've been impacted? Because on the one hand, going through the book, I was like, wow, this opened my eyes up to a bunch of just different levels in the text that I hadn't seen before. But how do you hope this book impacts the average believer who takes time?
Yeah, so for a Christian, I'd like them to go, wow, Jesus. So to increase our admiration of Jesus, Jesus, the most loving person ever to walk this planet, the bravest person ever to have walked this planet, physically brave, who actually went towards danger and pain greater than anyone has ever gone towards, but also the smartest person who's ever walked this planet. And so for us to appreciate a facet of Jesus that we may not readily appreciate, that then means that we realize he's got to be the guide for our life. And also in our Bible study that we should be expecting to see a lot. So I hope people go away thinking, that's a story I've known for a while and I didn't see that depth. I wonder what other depths I'm missing out. Oh, I must get more serious about my Bible study to make sure I'm getting the full riches. And then with a non-Christian, I would hope that they go away with the same, wow, Jesus, this is the guy I need to have guiding my life.
And I just want to touch back on something you said earlier. I appreciate when I asked about, does it take special knowledge to see some of these connections? I love that you said part of it is we need to actually just slow down because we have that tiny aspect of the story that we think we know, and we just kind of gloss over everything else for what we think. And so just that slow down, I think, is an important lesson from this conversation, really to start seeing some of these connections we've glossed over before as we've been reading our Bibles. Peter, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out about the important, cool work you guys do at Tyndale House, where do we discover you on the web?
Yeah, so tyndalehouse.com, you'll find plenty of resources there. We got a free magazine, so go /magazine for that and subscribe to that. That's electronic stuff. We've got podcasts and so on. Also, we've got a 501c3 in the US, friendsoftyndalehouse.com, you'll find, for people who want to support what we do and wish us to do more. Yes, absolutely. Go and support us there. So tyndalehouse.com and friendsoftyndalehouse.com are the 2 key websites.
And like we do with every episode, we'll make it easy. We'll have links to all the sites that Peter just mentioned. So if you want to find out more, support, whatever it might be, you can just click on through. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Peter Williams. Once again, our book today was The Surprising Genius of Jesus, What the Gospels Reveal About the Greatest Teacher. And Peter, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you.